Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to our first session of the afternoon, which is one I'm personally looking forward to. And it follows on some of the themes, actually, which we touched on this morning. So the title of the session is, Where will the next Mr. Bates, Wolf Hall or Gavin and Stacey come from? And who will pay? I will leave our chair, Jane, to introduce this very distinguished panel. But Jane herself, we're delighted to have as our chair for this session. She is now a leading academic, having had a long and distinguished career in in journalism, as a journalist and as a commentator. So it's over to you, Jane.
Thank you very much, Colin. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I, coming straight from the awards ceremony, celebrating the very best of British television and audio, it would be fair for some of you to be asking what crisis in British television? However, among the biggest challenges facing public service media is the rise of streamers and the impact on the market, particularly homegrown, high-end drama, although we will talk about some of the other categories that are impacted. This has been one of the big questions, of course, is will there be in the future the sort of drama that some of my guests here are responsible for, including Wolf Hall and, of course, Mr. Bates versus the Post Office that's just won the TV drama. I'm Jane Martinson, and I'm delighted to be here with this panel of some of the most celebrated members of British television. The man on my left has probably done more than anyone else to raise awareness in the public about this issue, having first started talking and worrying about it in 2017. He also probably needs no introduction. Peter Kosminsky is one of our most acclaimed dramatists in this country, with a string of hit documentaries and drama, most recently, of course, Wolf Hall. To his left, we have Patrick Spence, fresh from this very dais, from collecting his award for Mr. Bates. He is responsible for lots of other hit shows as well. Now he is managing director of AC Chapter 1. Previously, he was creative director of ITV Studios. To his left, CEO of Hartswood Film, Sue Vertue is responsible for some incredible hit drama and comedy, including Sherlock, Does Look Is Cancelled, and before that, her glorious career has also included Mr. Bean. Last but not least, we have Andy Harrower at the end. He, as Chief Executive of Directors UK, is there to fight for royalty payments, but also a level playing field for all directors. To kick off this really important issue for the industry, first to explain why, and also, most importantly, what can be done about it, I'm going to ask Peter to talk about why there is such a crisis and why you think a levy, which is something that you have campaigned for, is the answer.
Thank you, Jane. Well, it's interesting that we have Patrick and I sitting here. Both of us have publicly stated that the programmes we're navigating the awards circuit for at the moment would not actually get made at the moment, could not get made at the moment. Wolf Hall, The Mirror and the Light, and Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, both of which were high-end dramas made for public service broadcasters, couldn't get made now. Well, why is that? The difficulty really is that the cost of making these programs in our country has spiraled up alarmingly. And I have a perfect point of comparison because 10 years ago I sat in this room to talk about the first series of Wolf Hall. Colin very kindly invited me. Also made for the BBC and Masterpiece, and I can compare the two. Why have our costs gone up so dramatically? Why have the cost of making programmes outstripped the ability of the public service broadcasters to pay for them? Well, I think most people in this room probably know the answer, but I'll tell you anyway. because of the streamers. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm a big fan of the streamers. I think they do a great job. They make some fantastic programs. But they have deep pockets, and we have a limited creative community here. It's large, but it's not infinite. And they compete for them. And they pay very highly for them. And it's had the effect of driving up the cost of everything we do way beyond the normal national rate of inflation. At the same time, they've had a suppressing effect on the international sales market because all international broadcasters are equally affected by the presence of these big beasts in the market. So how do we normally fund programs in the UK? Well, we go to a public service broadcaster, they give what's called a license fee, we get some money as an advance on overseas sales, and then there's the tax break. Well, the first of those two have diminished relative to the cost of making the program dramatically, which has left a shortfall. And currently there's no way to bridge that gap. And that's why I say that we couldn't make Wolf Hall today. In fact, we barely managed to make it 2 years ago. So what's the solution? Well, people have said, what about another tax break? There are really 3 problems with that. First of all, I don't think the Treasury would agree to it. I just look around at the tax situation at the moment. They're not going to be handing out tax money particularly enthusiastically, and it would be quite a lot of tax money. Secondly, I think it would attract the streamers to make even more of their programs here. And it would have the same effect as the first tax break had. It would drive up the cost. So it would actually exacerbate the problem for public service broadcasters. And thirdly, the tax break would be open to the streamers. So it wouldn't particularly help the problem that we're dealing with, which is the fact that the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, our public, highly regulated public service broadcasters can't get their shows made. So I don't think another tax break is the solution. So what is the answer? Well, in 17 other countries in Europe, they levy the local streamers' revenue, the subscription revenue, the things that we all pay every month to the streamers to watch their output. And I've proposed, and as you say, Jane, I first raised this in 2017, that we put a 5% levy on the UK subscription revenue of all the streamers who broadcast into the United Kingdom. That would raise a significant amount of money, just as it does in 17 other countries in Europe. And that would create a pot of money that the public service broadcasters could access and the streamers could access if they were in co-production with a public service broadcaster. And that would close the gap and make it possible for the BBC, ITV, and Channel 4, Channel 5 to compete again with the streamers, keep them on their mettle, if you like, ensure that some creative decisions about what we watch in this country are made in Britain rather than all of them being made in California. So, everyone accepts, I think. Some people may not think it's a great idea, but they all accept that it would solve the problem. So what's the difficulty? If it's going to solve the problem and it doesn't cost the government anything, why not do it? Well, I think you all know the answer to that. A tariff is not particularly, which is, I suppose, what a levy is not a particularly popular thing at the moment in the Trump universe. God help us. So the question is this, and I'll leave it for this highly informed audience to consider. Does our government which declares itself to be a friend of public service broadcasting, have the guts to stand up to the bully in the White House and institute a levy on the streamers' subscription revenue, just as they've done in so many other of our neighbours' territories, and defend 100 years of our public service broadcasting tradition? Or do they want to let the thing go by default, to see our public service broadcasters become what they've become in America, kind of ghetto broadcasters, not able to compete to make the shop window of broadcasting, which is high-end drama, high-end documentary, high-end comedy, and leave the field to a bunch of American, mainly, but not exclusively, American streamers who make their creative decisions based on other considerations rather than what's in the best interest of our audience.
Peter, thank you. Much to discuss there. I should have said at the beginning, there will be time. I do know, having chaired these panels before, that VLV audiences like asking questions. I might need a nod to make sure I leave it enough time, because I'm also prone to ask lots of questions myself. I'm actually going to go now to Sue, because brilliantly, I think, as a journalist chairing a panel, this is an incredibly newsy topic, because we've just had a story in Broadcast magazine with a sort of new. There have been lots of questions about what are producers doing about this? Where does PAC stand? And there's a story today about a group of producers who've been meeting to actually discuss this issue, which there is widespread agreement about it being difficult and what can be done. Sue, can you tell the audience what has been happening and what this possible solution might entail?
Yeah, I mean, it's partly also to do with the CMS committee report, which I'm not expecting everyone to have read because it's 120 pages long, but which I know that you talked to them about that as well. And the producers do know there's a problem for what you're saying as well. I don't think it's just the streamers coming in and putting the prices up. I don't think Brexit helped, and COVID certainly didn't help, because there was suddenly far more demand than there were people to make the shows. So that's where a lot of the inflation came from, and it's not really gone down again. So producers being producers and wanting to solve problems, we've had a few Zooms with as many producers that wanted to get on the Zooms and talk about it. And we've also now been talking to PACT, and PACT are doing a bigger picture thing, because it's not just high-end TV problems, it's also unscripted and comedy and children's and things. So they're doing that, but we're going to be doing the high-end TV part of that. And we're getting a sort of a working committee to do that. And we will be, I mean, looking at the CMS, there were various recommendations which we'll talk about, but also we've got to go and get the data. We've got to crunch the figures. We've got to get the economists and say, what's the return on the investment on things like tax credits? I believe, and I think we do believe, that the government would be open to doing a higher tax credit on two different kinds of things. One is they want to make sure that our tax credits remain competitive with the rest of Europe. And my feeling is we might be just getting out of kilter with that a bit. I saw today, or this week, I think it was this week, that Netflix, the three-body problem, is going to Hungary now, and I don't know why. I don't know if that's because they've got a better tax credit or not, but that's a huge amount of work that's going out of the country. So the recommendation was that they become nimble for the general tax credit. But there's also another idea that there's a tax credit for more British programmes, in the same way they've done for the film now. So there's lower budget British films. They've done a higher tax credit, which you can access if you pass certain cultural tests. And we need to look at that and see what the level of that is. Is that up to 3 million or something else? And would that be a higher tax credit, which would help there? But there are other things as well. There's do we go and get tax relief on development? At the moment, it's really hard to develop things because the broadcasters aren't giving as much money for development. So that's all coming out of the production company's budget. If we can get tax relief on that, that will be a game changer, I think. What else should I say? I mean, I'm sorry, Peter, I know I can see the levy thing. I don't think it's as simple as a government thing. I don't think they would go for it, to be honest with you, and I think they will go for the tax credit. But we've got to find something that's going to work, and it's not to do with Trump and everything else. I think it's a bigger thing than that. I don't think we, as a nation, are generally levy tariff people. We've never done it. We've never done the blank take. Well, we don't.
The ED levy?
Okay. What generally we're not. We don't have a foreign language. A lot of them do it for protection of foreign language, I think. We don't do that. We want inward investment. We make an awful lot of money from inward investment from the streamers here, and I think it would be detrimental to have a levy. No.
Can I just ask one thing from what you said? When you said you thought the government might adopt a tax credit, have there been talks?
Well, I think they've been open to it. I mean, Chris has said, I think, that he wants simple things.
Right. And it's Chris Bryant who
Yeah,
sort of...
yeah, sorry. The last thing I read, he didn't seem to be very pro the levy. I think the high-end tax credit would be the way to go with the other pieces. Yeah.
I will come back about government action in a moment, but I do want Patrick. Can you talk about how you see the crisis? You're at the cold front, as it were. You've said publicly you don't think Mr. Bates would be made now. Can you explain why, and also the impact on what kinds of drama and what kinds of content?
I suppose the first thing to say is I wouldn't develop Mr. Bates today. So I can't speak for every other producer in town.
Who would?
But I was the person that developed it, and when I started developing it, there was a clear route to production if a broadcaster came on board with £1 million an hour. And that clear route to production, and I'm slightly repeating everything that Peter has said, involves an international distribution advance, which in the case of Mr. Bates needed to be £800,000 an hour for a 4-part drama about post office workers and a computer system. And even 3 years ago, when I went asking for that money, that was a tall order. And now I would say the equivalent for a 4-part drama, and I'm going to bang on about 4-part dramas, the equivalent distribution advance for a 4-part drama, if I had pitched it for the first time, being about sub-postmasters and a computer system. And remember, the story had been out there for 10 years and no one gave a shit. So, sorry, I'm so sorry, forgive my language. No one cared. So the distributors were quite happily saying, but no one seems interested in this story in this country, let alone internationally. I still got an advance of 800 grand, which I'm very lucky to have got. I reckon today we get 300 grand. Times that by 4, add on tax breaks, and you're basically £2 million short. By the way, we made it for £2.2 million an hour, which was the least we could make it for, and that involved all the producers working for free for a year. I will never see any payment for my work on Mr. Bates, nor will a couple of others. And the cast had to do it for a fraction of what they would normally earn. We went to them with sort of the television equivalent of regional theatre rates and said, take it or leave it. No, everyone's getting the same. If you want to be in this show, this is all we can afford to pay you. And every single actor said yes. We got our first choice in every role. But really, that show should have cost £2.4 million an hour. We made it for 200 grand less by the cast taking half that cut and the producers working for free. So, and that is £2 million in total more than I could raise today. So it's a non-starter. So I'm going to shut up now, but I'm going to finish on one point, which is my thing. I sit between two heroes, by the way, for their work, who both have a slightly different take on what the solution is. All I care about is that somebody helps us. And I think they're both wise plans, by the way. I'm not going to, I don't think anyone is in conflict with each other. We're just trying to find a solution. But I would say if I could make a personal appeal or a contribution to this conversation, it would be to say, I used to love working on single films. Again, Peter is a hero of mine for the work that he did in the 80s and 90s in the arena of the television single film and two-parter. I made a film called Marvellous, for instance, a long time ago with Toby Jones as well. There's no chance that you can make material like that for television today. The single film for television is essentially gone. No. My point is the four-part, uniquely British, non-crime driven, non-returning television show into which we would put Wolf Hall, Mr. Bates, It's a Sin, I mean, the list, I could go on and on, Sixth Commandment, Douglas is cancelled. That's gone. It's already gone unless we get help. So as a cultural form, there will be, from 2 years from now probably, no more four-parters unless they are incredibly cheaply made. So there will still be some that can be made, but they won't be state of the nation. They probably can't film in London, which is where most of these stories are set. And they won't involve big casts or anything other than people sitting in rooms talking. And sometimes, by the way, that makes great drama. I'm not knocking it, but I am saying there's not a chance you could make Mr. Bates today. And I think most of those kinds of shows will be things that you will look back on fondly and say, why don't we have shows like that anymore? And the answer is because the gap between what the broadcasters can pay, because they want the four-parters, Polly at ITV and Lindsay at BBC, everyone, they're all keen to keep making them. They're putting their money on the table, but the gap between what they can pay us and what we then need to raise ourselves is too large for the four-part, limited series, British drama that is hopefully about something. I think it's really sad.
Well, we need to get the co-productions back again.
Absolutely, but they're not there.
Which means
at
the
the
streamers and the broadcasters need to talk together and work out the holdbacks.
Yeah.
Because that's the problem at the moment. So.
Can I just ask, before talking to Andy, I want to ask you two, you're both working on projects that will be interested in this room. I certainly am. Hack, which is about the phone hacking scandal broken by The Guardian, and, of course, the Grenfell Tower catastrophe and scandal. How is this funding crisis affecting these two in development dramas? Can you talk about that?
I don't want to be unhelpful, Jane.
Oh, no.
But Grenfell is quite a difficult and sensitive project.
Right.
I want to keep that quite separate from...
Okay.
I'll talk about the hack.
I'll
take Peter out of his difficult situation and say the hack has been made, and the hack is the interweaving of it's a drama coming up on ITV in the autumn, and it is the interweaving of two true stories: the Guardian investigation into phone hacking and the Metropolitan Police investigation into the murder of Daniel Morgan. Because it's two stories in one, it is 7 episodes long, not 4 episodes, but it is essentially 2 four-parters, and therefore the budget was enormous compared to Mr. Bates. It was well over £3 million an hour, and again, it hasn't even been out yet, and I'm already saying I couldn't do that either. So, but we raised the money for that 3 years ago when the world was a different place. So I think Peter said something brilliant a while back, which is to point out that most of the dramas that we're fighting to protect are dramas that organically and by their very nature are asking tough questions of the way we live and who runs our lives. And there is a sort of, it's not intended, but there's a sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Suppression of our voices if we're not careful. If we can't give great writers this form to write in which there is no desire to keep making returning series of them, and it will ask tough questions, there would be nowhere on television to let them ask them. So yeah, the hack is one that, again, there's no way we could make the hack if we started from scratch today.
Thank you.
Tune in this autumn.
Andy, this is not just a problem for production side of things, is it? Tell us about your work with directors and some of the discrepancies you've seen between, say, the US and the UK.
Well, thank you. I think my colleagues have outlined really well the challenges that we're facing here. In terms of how it affects directors, I mean, one thing we are working on is to get a level playing field. residual payments or royalties are an important part of how directors are able to make a living and survive when they're not actually being paid to work on productions. The UK broadcasters have, for the last 25 years, worked with us, and we've had deals in place that ensure that directors are paid royalties for when their programs are repeated and sold around the world. And we're now in a process to agree something similar with the streamers. And it's important that our members are paid in that way, because, again, if you can't live between jobs, you're likely to leave the industry. I had an email from a member recently, someone that has directed many of the primetime shows, factual entertainment shows that we've all enjoyed on BBC, ITV and others, and they're working as a window cleaner at the moment. So there is a real crisis here across the industry. Obviously, it's not just directors, it's many of your colleagues as well.
There's 70% of freelancers are currently out of work, I read in a recent broadcast report. So it's huge. Tell me, can we go back about I think there's a broad agreement that there is a problem here in terms of funding and what can be done for lots of reasons. One of them is streamers, and it's a big one. There have been others. In terms of a call to arms, the important thing here is the government. So I want to come back to you, Peter, because there is this point, and I think it was interesting you said something like that, a levy, which sort of is a tariff, because the Hollywood Reporter piece that you did, which was brilliant, I think the headline, obviously it being very much focused at a US audience, was "It's not really a tariff," or something like that. But how do you think, in terms of your involvement with the government, or do you feel that there's any way that they might be encouraged to help? And if so, will the levy gain any traction?
Well, it's a complicated question. I'll try to be brief. Your audience can see writ large the problem that we face. The government is looking for guidance, and we're in disagreement. We're not in disagreement about the problem, we're in disagreement about the solution. I think, as Sue has said, the game changer was the report published by the Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee, quite recently, really. And I think, from my point of view, the fact that they came out unequivocally in favour of a levy, their attitude, as I read the report, on a further tax break was, it's interesting and worth exploring further, and further research has to be done. But on the levy, it was an unequivocal support. And at that point, and the government said, well, we welcome the report and we'll respond in due course. I think that was a surprise, frankly. But the committee had travelled to Europe, been to France, had a look at the way levies are working over there, and concluded that that was certainly a way forward. So now I think it is incumbent upon the government to take it seriously. And incidentally, I had a letter from Sir Chris Bryant, who's the relevant minister at the CMS, who said that he wasn't, in terms, he said, I'm not ruling out a levy, I just need to be persuaded of the case, which is different from what he said publicly. The case is being looked into by the BFI, which is doing a body of research about how the levy operates in Europe, and they report in the summer.
And the idea is that they would also be the body that would...
Well, in my proposal, they would run the levy fund, the fund created, and it would be a large sum of money, hundreds of millions of pounds a year. They would distribute it in the way that they distribute lottery money to creative bodies at the moment. So you rightly drawing my attention to the op-ed I wrote in the Hollywood Reporter just about a week or so ago, in which the strap headline was, "A levy is not a tariff." And I'll explain why I said that. If you're an American manufacturer and you want to sell goods into China, you currently face a more than 100% tariff. Someone has to pay that before your goods can be allowed to be sold in China. So obviously a massive disincentive. But there's no way that American company can access any of the money that's raised by that more than 100% tariff. It goes to the Chinese government. That's a tariff, in my view. This is different. If we take a 5% levy on the UK subscriptions of all the streamers themselves can apply for some of that money back to use to offset the cost of a production. The only proviso is they have to be in co-production with a public service broadcaster.
Which is Sue said
And
is something
Sue's made the really important point that one of the reasons why we're all in the position we are is because co-productions have collapsed. When I first raised this in 2017, they were declining. Now they've virtually disappeared. So you can't, the PSBs can't use money from the streamers in co-production to offset the shortfall in costs. This proposal would have the double virtue, if you like. Sorry, Sue. No pun intended. The double virtue of reinvigorating the co-production market. So there's a pot of money that the public service broadcasters can use to get their high-end TV shows made. Doesn't exist at the moment. It's new money. And it would reinvigorate the co-production market because to access some of that considerable pot of money, the streamers would have to co-produce the program with one of our public service broadcasters. So it's not a tariff because they can kind of get their money back.
I do want to come to the audience, but if I can just ask the rest of you, how quickly do you see agreement being reached by the government, really? Because really it's about what will the powers that be do to help. Do you see this by the end of this year? You know, when does this need to happen? How big it?
Well, I think from our way, it depends how quickly we can do the work. I mean, tenders are out now to people to crunch. And I think we should be important. It's not. I don't think we should say it's levy or high end. I think it's a bigger problem than that, and I think it's something we all need to work together. I think the streamers, the broadcasters, the producers, the agents, everybody needs to work together and find solutions, and it may not be just one thing. As I said, you know, we need to also have access to the apprentice fund, which we can't at the moment because of the way it's set up. They can change that. We can get better IP rights with the streamers, which means that we can go and sell it and get more money in that way. You know, at the moment, if you do something with a streamer, they take all rights and we can't sell it anywhere else. That needs to be done. So I think it can be done quite quickly, or certainly the scripted side, our scripted side can be done fairly quickly and given to the government. I think the packed bigger picture, we've got BFI involved.
Unscripted.
Well, that's all of it. So that'll be children. We'll be doing comedy as well, which is also in state of crisis, which is the Gavin and Stacey. Where would that come from now? I think that might take longer. We're working with the BFI as well. So as quickly as we can, I think. But it is a big pan problem, and I don't think we should keep looking at being one thing or another thing. I think we need to look at lots of things. And,
Patrick?
Oh, come
Can you
on,
see?
wag your tail.
I was saying earlier, I wag my tail less than I used to. It just has to be. It has to be. Okay. The only way I can answer that question is to say I'm not developing any 4-part miniseries. I'm not developing any limited series anymore because they're too hard to set up. We are making a couple next year that we've just managed to get under the wire. And then from now on, all I'm thinking about is, and by the way, there's great television to be made in this, but all I'm thinking about is returning series, many of them crime-based. That's all I think I can finance right now. Listen, I think it's really important that we're making huge amounts of different kinds of television, but...
We've got to get those workers back to work. There's an awful lot of unemployed people.
We need to look at having a broader range of types of television, and we need to get people back to work, yeah. So hopefully this year.
So if Chris Bryant is listening to that, I think that's, given the economy. Andy, just finally before
Yeah,
you
I mean,
ask some more.
I'd agree. It is urgent, particularly given the timescale between developing and something going on screen. It's a long time, and it's good to hear you talk about the streamers need to be part of this as well. They acknowledge that they've benefited from, that they've come here and they've had access to a workforce that has been trained for,
They do put a lot of money into
50
training,
years.
though.
Yeah,
actually.
they do.
They really do.
They do. But they rely on our talent. Many of whom have come up from the PSB system, so it's in their interests as well for this to work. PSBs need to survive alongside the streamers.
Yeah. Right. So, questions. One immediately there, I can see. I'm sorry if these people are slightly behind, but do raise your hand. Thank you. The mic, is there 2 mics or just brilliant? So there, sorry, this lady there.
Hello, Carol Tongue, Chair of the UK Coalition on Cultural Diversity. We're allowed to do this under European law we're still part of. It's called the AVMS Directive, which allows for various measures to improve the possibilities for British production. I'd like to say a big thank you to Peter Kosminsky for the excellent proposal he's making and that it's adopted by the Select Committee. The government has to respond to every single recommendation in that report. So we really do look forward to what they're going to say to each recommendation, including the levy. I would say it has to be a toolkit of measures, many of which are in that report. Levy, yes, but also investment obligations. And here I'm looking at Andy, and I know he may have looked at that possibility, where if you look in France, the streamers have to put in 20% of their revenues into national European productions. So it can also be done by investment obligations. And then rejoin Creative Europe, the European programme that has a media part to it, which will immediately open up the co-production avenue that provides. But then the Conservative government in the 1980s did something unbelievable to save £2 million. They withdrew from the Council of Europe Eurimage programme to save £2 million. We need to rejoin that. That's 42 countries. It's now not only for co-production for film, but also for high-end television. At a stroke, those two, and the government, again, we need to keep the pressure up and ask them. That could open up a whole stream of co-productions. And guess who a lot of countries want to co-produce with? It's us. Thank you.
That was really interesting, but do you have any specific question?
Well, I did look at Andy when I mentioned the issue. If not everybody's able to go along, say, with the levy idea, I get. What about investment obligations? Because after all, that's really what we're asking our PSBs to do. Why don't we ask our streamers? It's, that they have to invest so much in British production, for example.
Yeah, I think it's, there's a lot to be said for that. And we were talking in the lunch break about, in France, where I think 45% of the films in cinemas are French films, and that is actually driving audiences into cinema, and that's good for the US studios as well. So it's not an either or. I think we will benefit from that mixed ecology.
Anyone else? This lady here. Do put your hand up if you want to.
Helen J, University of Westminster. I was wondering whether the existence of Adolescence, a streamer-commissioned, UK-originated sort of state-of-the-nation piece, reinforces or challenges your arguments. Does it demonstrate that streamers will fill the gap, or does it just demonstrate the size of the gap?
I wrote a column about that just recently. Who wants to answer that?
I'll go. I'll say, firstly, it's magnificent. Adolescence, and it's magnificent. It was made by a streamer, and I think Anne Mensah and her team at Netflix would love to do more shows like that. But I'm guessing they commission 10 shows a year. And so how many of those 10 will be limited series British stories like Adolescence? I'm guessing 2, maybe 3. The BBC, on the other hand, and indeed ITV, would probably expect to do 10 of those a year each, or between 5 and 10 each. And so if the broadcasters can't keep those numbers up, they're not going to be replaced by what streamers do. I think Adolescence is an example of what happens when streamers turn their attention to those kinds of shows, and it should be widely celebrated, but they're not going to replace the numbers that terrestrial broadcasters do.
Peter.
I agree with Patrick. Adolescence is an outstanding piece of work, as is Toxic Town, which Jack has also written for Netflix. And I absolutely celebrate the fact that they're making it. It's fantastic, and that they are prepared to deploy resources that a PSB could never afford to deploy, and Jack has said that. But just think about it for a minute. What's Adolescence about? It's about the radicalization online of young men leading to violence. Well, Columbine, many other similar high school shootings in America. It's a subject that plays in America. Think about Toxic Town. It's about a local urban population blighted by a nearby industrial facility. Erin Brockovich. These are important subjects told by British program makers about events that have taken place or built around events that take place in Britain, but they play internationally. My contention is that Mr. Bates would not. We offered Wolf Hall to all the streamers in turn. They turned it down. Think about Hillsborough. Think about Three Girls, the fantastic drama that the BBC made some years ago about the grooming of young girls in the north of England. I don't think these would be made by Netflix, even if Jack Thorne wanted to write them. Or maybe if Jack Thorne wanted to write them. He's just brilliant. He's just brilliant. But I'm just
Three
trying
Girls
to make...
would still be made, wouldn't they? 3 Girls would still be made.
I don't know if they would be made by the streamers.
No, not by the streamers, but...
No. Well, the BBC couldn't afford to make it now, and they've said so to me.
What, 3 Girls?
Yeah. Well, ask Lindsay.
Okay.
And this is the point. There are, and Patrick's put his finger on it. It's about freedom of speech. It's about free speech. Okay, there are lots of organs of free speech in a democratic society, but dramas that deal with matters of public policy is part of that. Why is it that after 10 years of nobody, articles appearing in The Guardian about the post office scandal and Computer Weekly, but nothing much happening, Patrick and Gwyneth come along with their drama, and suddenly it's on the front page of all the tabloids and raised in Parliament. Why? Because drama speaks to a big and different audience, and that drama, which was beautifully made, galvanized people. And that's part of a free society. That's part of being able to speak truth to power, to hold a mirror up to our world, which is what we all try to do all the time. I don't think this is a trivial matter, the fact that we're losing the ability to do this. And I would throw out a challenge to this audience. The VLV has influence in this country and with the government. If this body were to call for the introduction of a levy, at this moment, it would have impact.
or a high-end tax credit.
See, quickly on adolescents, but then I'm going to do a poll in a minute. But go on, adolescents. Because you've talked about the whole issue of apprenticeships. Isn't one of the issues that Jack Thorne, brilliant as he is, was sort of seed funded his talent by Channel 4, and the streamers don't do that, do they? With fresh new talent. That's what we need PSBs for. Is that fair?
Well, I don't know. For the training that I know that, for instance, Amazon and Netflix do, they do. I mean, our office manager at the moment was somebody who was trained from zero at Amazon. So,
Baby Reindeer. I think you could probably, if you thought about it, Disney have commissioned 2 or 3 shows from brand new writers. Baby Reindeer Richard Gadd was unheard of until Baby Reindeer. I don't think it's fair to say that Netflix won't commission new writers at all. They have huge courage, those commissioners. It's just they can only commission a certain kind of programme.
Andy, do you want to add anything before I do a quick poll?
Well, I think it's just worth remembering that, ITV, BBC, they're free to air. Adolescence isn't, so it's important that the numbers we saw earlier today suggest that in 10 years' time there'll still be 25% of the population that will be watching TV over DTT, and it's that universality sort of question that we can't forget in this as well.
Sorry. Can I do a poll though? So Peter just threw out a challenge to the VLV. Colin, maybe you don't have to vote, but everybody else here, do you think the government needs to do something to help the industry? Hands up. Pretty universal, that. Is it fair to ask those in favour of a levy? I thought you weren't voting. And another tax break of some kind.
as well. I did try and say it's not an either or.
Either or, I know. I did.
This is a problem because I think we could lose out if we go down one way or the other
Sorry,
way.
Sue, I don't want to be in constant debate with you, but when I saw Sir Chris Bryant in the DCMS, in his office, he said really clearly to me, and there were civil servants present, we want one solution that fixes it, and fixes it for good. And the only solution on the table is one solution that would fix it. And nobody disagrees that pot of money created by the levy would fix it, is the levy.
Did you actually specifically say, politically, are you willing to impose a levy given everything that's happening or has happened over the past 100 days?
Well, I saw him some time ago. I saw him before the levy thing really got going. But his position at that point was, let's do the research. And the BFI has been doing the research for the DCMS. But as Patrick has said, the problem is immediate. And Patrick's comment is actually probably, in my view, the most important thing that's been said here today, which is that he wouldn't develop it now. It's called self-censorship. In the Soviet Union, where I used to make documentaries years ago, people didn't write things, not because somebody was strong-arming them not to write them, but because they knew they would never be published and they knew they'd end up in a gulag if they did. It's self-censorship that is our worst enemy here. Patrick is saying he wouldn't even bother developing these projects. So it will never even get to the point where the BBC or ITV or Channel 4 has to sit and wonder how it's going to raise the money for it, because he hasn't developed it in the first place, because he looks at the situation at the moment and sees no prospect of getting it made. That's the most dangerous and insidious thing that's facing us. And he's absolutely right. In 5 years or 10 years, we or our children will look around and say, didn't we used to make programs like Hillsborough? The programs about the Brighton bombing. Well, what's ever happened to that? We don't do that anymore.
It's important to differentiate. When I say I wouldn't develop them, I wouldn't develop them because I don't think there's any lack of appetite at the broadcasters for these kinds of shows. They are very keen to keep commissioning. I know that Polly gets very exercised every time I open my mouth because she wants it made clear, and quite rightly, that ITV and the BBC and Channel 4 are very keen to keep making these 4-part dramas. The problem is not the broadcasters or their ability to finance it. They're only expected to give us £1 million an hour. The problem is raising the what we call the deficit, the rest of the money. That's where the gap has opened up, is that the collapse of the international market has meant that it's much harder to raise the deficit. And that's why I wouldn't develop Mr. Bates, because I would have looked at that and remember we didn't think anyone was going to watch it, even after we'd made it. That you look at that story and you think, well, that's never going to sell abroad, so there's no point in asking for people to fund it.
Colin had a... Oh, Colin and then the lady behind. Mike?
Thank you. I just want to ask, I very much understand the arguments, and I've been involved in this discussion for some time with Peter and others, and have spoken to various people about it beforehand. If we were now writing to Chris Bryant, whom I sort of know reasonably well, and I very much and looking at the levy as an example, I very much understand the arguments for avoiding something horrible, which is, if we don't do this, all the things we've been talking about might happen, or won't happen, if you like. Is there a way of just putting that in a more positive way? From a government's point of view, what are the most positive arguments we could put forward to government for doing this? How can I actually express in a fairly concrete way what all the clear benefits are from doing this, apart from just avoiding something bad happening? I haven't put that very clearly, but I hope you can sort of grasp what I'm saying. How should we frame the approach to government?
Sue, do you want to...
Do you mean about the levy?
Yeah,
I
levy, for
don't think
example.
it is a positive.
Well, on a campaign from the VLV, you mean, or generally?
Yeah, sorry?
You don't mean specifically the levy, do you? You're meaning of sort of the
Well,
VLV...
a campaign. I said, for example, the levy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. What will attract? What will be the most attractive argument to government?
Well, I think our industry is a growth industry. The inward investment is doing really well. I think, for instance, if we did do the levy, I think they could go up that, for instance. But from what I can feel is they're sitting there waiting for us to give them some proposals, and they're willing to help. They know they want to do it. It's a great export, our industry.
Sue's right. We're a massive contributor to the exchequer.
I'm right.
Right about so many things. It's not about the tax break.
Stop.
We're a massive positive contributor, and this government is pro-growth. That's their public service broadcasting. High-end drama starts reduced by 25% last year, year on year, down to, I think, 2017 levels. That's not growth, that's contraction. And every time we make a show, we go somewhere, we rent hotels, we rent props, we do location catering, we spend money in the economy. We hire local people to act as supporting artists. And at the moment, we're not doing that. And Sue and Patrick are right to talk about unemployment. Currently, there's a contraction going on in the streaming world. They're making fewer shows. They're much more cautious. As a result, people are unemployed. Why? Because normally that could be offset by the public service broadcasters who have different forms of funding. So, okay, you can't go and work for Netflix like you did last year, but ITV's doing a drama and they want to hire you. Except they're not at the moment. because they can't afford to make them. So it would help with unemployment. People who are unemployed don't pay tax. We have the ability, and we've done this very successfully in the past, to be a massive plus contributor to growth and to the public finances. At the moment, we can't. And let's just get right down to this, okay? The streamers pay virtually no tax. They have virtually no regulatory obligations, whereas the public service broadcasters are weighed down with regulatory obligations, rightly so, I believe. All we're asking is that the streamers make some kind of contribution to make sure that as a, let's be charitable and say, unintended side effect of their business model, they are destroying our indigenous broadcasters. Let's ask them to make a small contribution to reinvigorate that market and to allow us to compete with them, because they will only be better. I used to work for ITV for 10 years, and people said, you know, it's about advertising finances it. Why do you do all these high-end programs? It's because we competed with the BBC. We wanted to do better than the BBC. Editorially, creatively, we wanted to win those awards. The PSBs will make the streamers better. They'll make them make better programs by keeping them on their mettle, and vice versa. It's a win-win. We just have to get them out of this mentality where they think that by destroying our indigenous broadcasters, they will somehow win. They won't.
I don't think they want to do that. I really don't think.
Well, then pay the levy.
I'm really conscious of time because we've run over.
I'm afraid, yes.
Yes, sorry. Hopefully you can. So just that remains for me to say, I think we can all agree there's been loads of agreement and that some of the best minds in the television industry are working on a solution, and I don't think we can ask for better than that at the moment. Let's hope the government listens to someone. Okay, thank you very much.